So I've been getting a lot of questions on how I pick my colors recently. Like, how do you do this? Or how do you make this do that? Or why did you choose to put this right there? And the biggest one, how did I get from this to that? And if you couldn't tell by the title of this video, that's what I'm here to answer. But before making this video, I thought to myself, am I really qualified to make this? I mean, sure, I made this and that and this and this and this, but is this really it? Is this truly the peak of color? Am I just a fraud? A fake shepherd to lead you little art lambs into the depths of art hell? So I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to prove to myself and you guys that I'm qualified enough to teach you about color. So I went to the craziest, most masterful, and insanely colorful artist I've personally ever seen, Mika Pikazo. I mean, just look at this. Look at how the colors just pop right out of the illustration. I've never really seen another artist do this to quite the degree that she does. And so I packed my bags and set out on an art journey to study this. And man, is that a story that I want to share here. But we don't have all day, and I gotta teach you guys about art first. So TLDR, here's the finished piece. We'll talk more about it later. Like how I worked out the composition, how I chose my colors, how I was able to balance all this stuff. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and let's learn about colors. What is color? Now, I can get as technical as I want with this topic, like how color is just a reflection of light off objects, so the only colors that we actually see are the ones that are bounced off those things, and so the real color of those objects are different from what we actually can see. Or how the colors displayed on screens like TVs and computers are not the full range of colors that we can actually see with our eyes, or just simply the difference between CMYK and RGB. My point is, the topic of color is vast, but you're not here for all that boring stuff. You're here to know how you can use these things in your drawings. So let's get started by defining what colors actually are. Colors are separated into three main parts: hue, value, and chroma/saturation. It's best to think of these three parts as three main questions that you want to ask yourself every time you want to use a color. Hue is what color is this? Value is what brightness do you want this color to be? And chroma/saturation is how strong do you want the color to be. To go into more detail, hue is basically what color it is on the color wheel, and you move around the color wheel going from warm to cool colors to choose what you want. Value is quite simply just how much white or black is in that color, how light or dark do you want it to be. And finally, there's chroma/saturation. Why am I saying two things at once? Well, I'm glad you asked. Yes, you. I'm talking about you sitting on your toilet watching me. I'm glad that you asked, and you better be washing your hands after this video. Chroma and saturation are pretty much the same thing except for one key difference. When it comes to chroma, when you change the strength of the color, as it gets stronger and weaker, the value stays the same. But when it comes to saturation, the value changes. Still not with me? Okay, how about this? As you change saturation, the color gets brighter or darker. Meanwhile, the chroma stays the exact same, gray. Still not with me? Okay, for now, let's just forget about chroma and just talk about the saturation. So as I mentioned before, saturation is how strong that color is. And now that we know what colors are, how do we use them? Color harmonies. There are many different ways to use colors, but one easy way to do this is to break down all this mess of a wheel and limit your use to only a few distinct colors that look really good together. Thankfully, past artists already figured out which and what colors go together. So thank you, past goats, and I'll use this knowledge to I don't know, draw some paper bags or something. So let's go over each of the basic harmonies, starting with monochromatic. This one's the simplest that you can get. You choose one color on the color wheel and you color only using that. This one is mainly used as practice, as you only limit it to one hue and you only have to think of the saturation and the values. But it could still result in pretty good looking drawings. Next up, we have analogous, which consists of choosing a narrow hue of colors on the color wheel that are right next to one another. This works when you have one really specific mood that you want to nail down, but you don't want to think too much about what colors to choose, so you only really choose one sliver of that color wheel. It does end up looking pretty good most of the time, but just like the last one in monochromatic, it is pretty restrictive overall. Next up, we have complementary and tetrad harmonies. This is where you get real high contrast and flashy pieces. To do this, you simply choose two hues that are opposite of the color wheel to one another, or in the case of tetrads, you choose two hue ranges. Again, the concept is very simple, but you really need to balance this one in order to make it look good. But if you think this is it, we're just getting started. Next is triad and split complementary. These use 3 different colors, and balanced just right, they get real big pops out of pieces. And then, as you can guess, next up is the square one. You choose 4 colors and you balance all 4 colors, you get a cool looking piece. And finally, we have the hexad, which is choosing 6 colors on the color wheel, which pretty much just means you draw a rainbow on the screen. And that's what I try to attempt later in the video. So as you can see, there's many different levels when it comes to choosing what colors you want to use. And these harmonies aren't really indicative of what your skill level is. Any high level artist can do a monochromatic piece and still make it look amazing. The point is, these give you a template so that if you're really stuck on what colors to choose, you can come back to this part and figure it out. Relativity. Every color is related to one another. Look at this photo. What are these 2 colors? Red and blue, right? Correct. This one is red and this one is also red? What? This one is clearly blue. I mean, just look at it. The background even is blue, so how come this one isn't? Well, my little art lamb. How about we consider the color right next to this so-called blue? It's surrounded in red. So really, what we see as blue isn't really blue, it's just more blue than the red it's surrounded by. Did you get that? No, that's fine. I didn't really for the first few years either. Just know that we only perceive colors in that way, only related to the colors around it. So, even if we slightly tweak a color, if the colors around it are vastly different from it, then it's going to look a lot more different than it actually is. Even just tweaking the saturation can give you the effect of changing a color, even though it's the exact same hue. For example, take a look at this blue. As I slowly desaturate it, it's going to look more and more red, even though I'm not changing the hue at all. Things like this are in play in pretty much every professional artwork that you see. You just don't really know about it. It's a really fascinating concept that you can experiment a lot with, and I really encourage you guys to try and do so. Contrast. Now, all this harmony and relativity stuff is cool and all, but how do you choose your colors, Mr. YouTuber? I thought you never asked, dear viewer currently driving to work. Better keep your eyes on the road. The way I pick my harmonies on straight instinct like a 6 spidey sense is by balancing my contrast. I think of what feeling I want to convey and choose the appropriate contrast and colors to match that feeling. For example, what if I want a viewer to feel alert? Well, the first thing that comes to my head is big bright red backgrounds, dark foregrounds, and bright flashes of light in the right spots. Things like this are what contrast is all about. Where do we want our viewer to look and how do we want that to stand out to them? To do this easily, you can think of colors in terms of temperatures like I mentioned before by splitting the color wheel in half, one side being warm and one side being cool. Really try to emphasize on one side for the main feeling and then add flashes of that other side to really add some good contrast. But we can't have everything pop out at us, as there has to be a chance for our eyes to rest so that we can focus on the main point of the drawing. So keeping up this balancing act and choosing your colors accordingly is always at the forefront of my mind, and it should be in the forefront of yours too. Blacks and whites. Now, I don't want to go too in depth on values in this video. I think that topic is too big and it just needs a separate video. But I do think that I need to mention blacks and whites. Do not use pure black or pure white in your drawings, especially at the early stages. You are basically sabotaging your balance and overdoing your contrast immediately off the get-go. I mean, just think about it for 1 second. If you have one part of your drawing that is pure black or white, that means everything else is either going to have to be really bright or really dark to match that, or it's just going to look mismatched. Now, obviously there are exceptions to this rule, but in order to do this, you need a very clear plan and knowledge of pretty much everything else in this video and more. And if you do have that, well, you can just go off and do your own thing. But again, it's a real common mistake that even I still make sometimes while thinking that I have it all figured out, so be warned. My study arc. And that's it for the strictly tutorial version of this video. All of those things are pretty much what I would say are the essentials to picking your colors. There's so much more to this topic, but obviously there's only so much I can do in the, a couple minutes that I have in this video. But let's finish this off on a little art expedition that I went on, studying Mika Pikazo. Now there's a plethora of things to go over on the way Mika Pikazo draws, and for that I would say to go to T-Po's video. He goes real in depth on how she makes her effects and her drawing decisions overall. But I don't think he went super in depth on how she makes her colors. So here's my shot at it. I separated her works into 3 distinct layers: the background, the subject, and all those crazy effects and colors you see. The background is often a very saturated color, with the subject being more natural to add some calmness to the chaos, and the foreground is also very saturated but in a way that clashes well with the background. This way it draws your focus to the subject while keeping the background and foreground really popping out at you. So using this breakdown, I started on my piece with the rough sketch. And for this type of bold and bright drawing, you really want to nail down that rough sketch really early. So that way you're not 4 hours into the drawing realizing that you've made a mistake and you want to end it all because your colors are not matching correctly. So with my rough sketch done, I went on to my lines and my base color and everything up until the rendering part. If you want details on how I do all this, it's in the previous video. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the subject for this piece is a character called Robin from Honkai Star Rail. If you know, you know. But TLDR, she's a singer, and the concept for this piece is that she's doing a photo shoot for a cover of a magazine called Colors. I thought she would be perfect for this as her hair is rather desaturated, so it would potentially blend well with the background while not clashing too hard with the foreground and matches the theme overall. But now we're on to the interesting part, the colors in the foreground. To do this, I chose colors from the Hexad Harmony and I added some white in the middle in order to add some lighting to it. So starting from a green base, I then went to red and then just built up color by color, finally ending with adding highlights of white in the middle and just mixing and matching until I was satisfied. One way I was able to do this without overloading what you're looking at is by balancing the values of each color. If I change this drawing to black and white, you can clearly see that you can tell which color is different from the others, even though there's no real color to it. This is what I mean by balance. You don't want everything to look the same, or else it's going to be very confusing and boring to look at. And from there, I just added some tones and other things, and voila, the whole thing is done. Although there's some inconsistencies here and there, I think I did pretty good for the first time really studying something like this. And to be honest, I'm quite proud of this result. I'd say this is probably one of the best things that I've made so far. And there we go, the complete video on how I do my colors. This topic is so vast, so I probably will make a lot of other videos on the little intricacies of each little part. But for now, this serves as a really good overview over everything. I hope you guys enjoyed the ride and learned something that you didn't know before. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.